Hi everyone, welcome to the second of our Zenith podcasts. My name is Keith O'Donnell. I'm with Technology. As ever, I'm joined by my fellow co-chair in the Zenith Emerging Technology Special Interest Group, Patrick.
Hey Keith. Hi, Patrick Downing. As Keith mentioned, I'm also one of the co-chairs for the Zenith SIG. Recently, I made a shift in career, and I now am working at GitHub. So happy to spend a little bit of time talking about that through this particular podcast, where we'll be focusing on open source and contributions.
So, if you've ever thought about getting involved in open source, whether it be as an individual or part of your own company, maybe dabbling into open source itself, to talk through just some of the things that we think you need to know getting started on your first day playing about with libraries.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be all that fancy. Anyone and everyone can get involved, and it could be as small or as big of an interaction and involvement as you want. So hopefully by the end of this, if you're not already familiar with it, you'll have a little bit more exposure and experience and be comfortable or feel comfortable to be able to dive it right in.
Okay, so getting started the first day, you decide that you want to take part in some sort of open source. How do you find the type of project that you want to get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Depending on what type of project or what type of effort you're trying to get involved in, chances are there's probably some form of repository where all the materials stored. So the first thing is, find where that is, whether they list it themselves or if you just do a little bit of Googling, you can probably figure that out and get to it relatively quickly. Then really the next thing to do is, what do you want to get involved with? You just want to understand more about what's going on. Great. Take a look with the code, kind of poke in through it, source files, documentation, what have you. You probably, if you're looking for it, it's most likely there, or at least there's some references to it. If you want to contribute, um, you kind of take a look at it from two different angles. Is this a bug or something that you've experienced in the program application, or something that's not correct that you want to address? Great. There's a process to do that, most likely through the repo. Is it On the flip side, is this a new feature, something that the product or thing doesn't offer that you think would be a valuable addition? Great. There's another way to do it or suggest it there and even potentially contribute to it if it's not already in planning or no one's really kind of like brought it up before. There's a whole bunch of different ways to kind of approach it. And frankly, it depends on the individual and how much they want to contribute. You can do it from a technical perspective, and you can also do it from a non-technical perspective.
In terms of the etiquette, like you just go in and like fork somebody's repository, start making changes, and then like try do a pull request to merge it back in, or like
Eh,
your experience and things that you've played about with.
I mean, that's a good way to get most likely the developers angry at you, but chances are they probably put safeguards to prevent that. Uh, there are different ways to do it, so I don't want to say one specific way because there are multiple ways. But chances are, again, if the particular project has been set up in a structured asynchronous development perspective, they probably have a contribution type documentation that kind of informs the people that want to get involved what's the best way to do it. Whether it is, to your point, fork your own version, make the changes you want, and then go through what we call a pull request system, or otherwise. So really, it comes down to the project and how you want to approach it, or how they want to approach it, I should say.
So now we've got an idea of like going in to contribute. It's really going to be, well, what's the value of that, both as like a contributor, if we're talking about individuals, and as somebody who's open sourced their own stuff. And I know that you've got a lot of experience here, Pat, and all the time that I've known you, you've been both a contributor and somebody who's set some stuff up to be contributed to. So you get some great stories on this. Maybe you can talk us through some examples.
And sure, absolutely. I can kind of go through in the spirit of Zenith and the SIG. I can actually talk about a little bit of my quantum computing kind of journey. So one of the first things I started doing after you and I got involved in what is this, and it was I wanted to understand a little bit more about how the code worked, and that's who I am, the nuts and bolts. So what I did was exactly what I just talked about, where I looked for where the source code was. There was a particular repo on GitHub, Qiskit for this example, And then I started diving through the documentation, diving through into the code itself, and trying to map what I knew, at least the very little bit that I knew at the time, to how it actually worked. And then based off of that, I started building that knowledge, a bit more here and there. And at that particular point, I said, you know what, I want to get involved with this. Exactly, you said, this is cool. I want to be involved. I want to help. I want to push this forward. What can I do? I'm not for a background, I'm not a physicist. So knowing the core quantum mechanical properties of how it works, that's not me. To your point, I have a technical background. So I understand code. I understand, open source contribution and whatnot. So I looked at the particular list of issues. This particular repo at the time had many. And so I just kind of started going through them. I said, okay, what are some of the things that are raised as things to be improved that people could potentially work on, but no one's particularly working on it right now. So I took a look at it, and the particular one, I think the two categories I was looking at were bugs/defects. So something that we knew, or the ecosystem knew wasn't working particularly well, and they were looking for someone to kind of debug that and figure it out, or feature improvement, like something that the community had talked about that they wanted to do, but it hadn't been done yet. And one of the very first contributions I did was kind of a bug fix, I'll put it this way, but it was just an administrative change of inclusive language, changing the primary branch of the repository from master to main, just doing a verbiage update. And that particular aspect, made sense to me from a DEI perspective. Like, yeah, let's go through this. This was a historic project. We need to update it. And it allowed me to get, my hands dirty, diving into it, understanding the process of, okay, I'm making this change. Here's the configuration. Here's how I go through it, and then pushing it out. And what does the approval and getting that, out the door kind of look like? And just setting the base for future and other improvements or changes that I can kind of contribute to. So that was really like my first journey into the open source for quantum computing, which at the end of the day had nothing to do with quantum computing. So that was pretty cool.
What's the weirdest thing that you've contributed to in terms of projects?
It's an interesting question. I guess it depends on what your definition of weird is.
Well, having known you as long as I've known you, it could be literally anything. It can be from, some sort of web-enabled thermostat control a light bulb or something, all the way to like some, Sega Game Gear emulator system. Yeah.
I guess I'll rephrase it as interesting and cool. Not so much that I contributed, but that I experimented with. I'll put it that way. This is actually one of my very first, I guess, interactions with open source was, we're going back to 2017 at this point, where if you remember back then, and relevant again from a emerging technologies perspective, is really when, Bitcoin and other coins really started gaining mainstream interest. I liked looking at it, not necessarily from a business perspective at that time, but from a technology perspective. I really liked the underlying technology that was running at Bitcoin at the time. And one of the big things that was very prevalent in that time period was, what's called hard forks, moving from, a different, branching off from the main chain in a different way. I'll just leave it high level like that. So one of the things I looked at was taking the Bitcoin core code, basically taking that repo, forking it off to my own version of it. And I wanted to take, from my background, being in cryptography and whatnot, I wanted to take a different algorithm and implement the same code, but having a different encryption scheme going forward. So basically, get a small amount of transactions on, change the code, and have it continue seamlessly, but using that different encryption scheme. So spent, I don't even remember how long, maybe a couple of weeks, just of, free time, just kind of diving into it. And eventually I did get a test net, what's called a test net, up and running that worked with my code. Now, this was not exactly a contribution back to, I had never pushed it back to the Bitcoin code, obviously. But taking that kind of approach of this exists. This is a new feature that I would like to introduce. Let me see if this is even possible. That was kind of the first step. If I wanted to contribute it back or propose it, and not that it would get accepted, but propose it back towards the main Bitcoin code, I could then push it back up and go through that process. But that's probably one of the cooler things that I've kind of worked on, where going through that process and getting it to work was like, I did this.
Mhm. Well, I mean, that's going to segue nicely into actually a future conversation. We circle back and start talking about decentralized ledger technology and how we're looking into that within Zenith. I think we'll wait until after we've had the brain trust session about that one before we start opinion on it.
Yes, that sounds like a plan. Always happy to dive into it from a technical perspective on that nature. And to your point, based off the brain trust conversation, I'm sure there'll be a lot of material and tangents to kind of pull at. So, Keith, we just talked about, how contributing to the various open source projects can be a little bit different based off of the repo, the project, the code, what have you. One thing that's probably worth talking about and just highlighting is, as part of Zenith, as part of FINOS, what is the way that people can contribute over to our code? How do people get involved? As the person who helped set up the process, can you walk us through how someone could where they could find the information, how they could get involved?
So it's going to be my fault on how messy this is, but it's hopefully relatively simple. So we start off as ever with our core site. So we have zenith.finos.org, and you go there and you can find everything about what. And up in the top corner, you're going to find a link to our GitHub. And so when you go there, it's going to take you into our main repo that has all of the information for every type of project we're working on. So for now, quite a lot of it is, the fundamentals of governance and the decks that we run that are a little bit crazy and all these different things, but also has a discussion page where we open up, like, here's all the barriers we think about in these technologies. And that kind of acts like our issues, where we identify these are things that we would love to see people put projects in. So we're kind of running that in the discussion part just now, where we encourage people to come in and say, I've got this great idea. I would love to work with other people within the financial services and fintech industry to try and solve this. And I'd love for the solution to be open source because I think it has a wider. And from there, what we would do is we would work with you, then we'd turn it into a project within the GitHub, and then it'd be a code base that you can start working on. And our goal is, in Zenith, we kind of have these proof of concepts and these minimum viable products that we can develop with everyone. So what we're hoping is that in Zenith, we have these proof of concepts or minimum viable projects where it's just, throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks, and just having a space where anyone can experiment on developing out new things that align with the emerging technologies we're talking. And if any of those do stick, if any of those have merit, and we think, hey, this could really be fundamentally groundbreaking or really interesting to take on, what we have is within FINOS, the much larger organization around everything that we have the FINOS labs where things are going to get fine tuned and precision engineering and stuff to make them a little bit more robust. And the FINOS labs is kind of like the space where we've got an established thing, but we just need it to be a little bit more mature before it's ready to go into the full FINOS repositories, where you've got the core libraries that anyone can then rely on within the industry. So our aim is almost to treat Zenith as like an accelerator up to, or incubator up to the accelerator, let's say. And then that accelerator goes out to the big leagues. It takes us on there. And so we keep it quite open and honest and very transparent. There's nothing in Zenith that's really too difficult. We have us as the central maintainers. So that's both you and I. We also have Peter. In fact, with him there. We have Carly, and we also have Paulina. And so they form up the core Zenith team who just sort of manage and maintain that the repository is running properly. And each of them have a different role within the organization. So Peter, he's another chair with us. He also runs the open source readiness special interest group. We have Carly, who is with Elastic, and she's a developer. So what we work with through the type of stuff that she's talking about is how do we get developers' voices heard a little bit? How do we make sure that what we're doing suits developers? And then we have Paulina, who represents developers themselves, because that's what she does. She's worked with both you and I on a lot of programs on KISS. And now she works in the DLT space herself. So, she's had a number of different jobs now in emerging technology. And it's great that she's there to sort of lend her voice to this is the way we should be working things. Here's how we've done it in other areas. So by taking these sort of points of view together, having it that we can just incubate ideas, start them off and put them as fundamental projects within there, we can then start to migrate them out to a more mature program where, just as you'd mentioned earlier, these would be things that would be published that have a list of issues that are either bugs or required features or requested features, and then other people can come in and target them. But we are more on the prototyping side where it's going to be, we see this blocker. So, for example, we've just done the AI primers and so forth. We've looked at, say, AI driven fraud detection. What we're looking at there is some blockers that we've identified where the parameters of how this is going to work, the best types of algorithms for this to work on, how we're going to mount this on different types of standard proprietary hardware or different types of cloud services. Like, these are all open questions that no one has a full solution for within the industry. That would be really great if we could contribute something that then becomes an open source standard that anyone in the industry could use. And we're at the stage where you could propose it and we could start to build it. And then lots of other people could come in and contribute as well. And I know that we're just at the start of Zenith, so it's mostly sort of ideas that are bouncing about. Eventually, we're going to hit that critical mass. We've got a list of projects where it's going to be, if anyone else wants to get involved, here's a list of things we'd love to see added to this. So I see it as an ever growing way of doing this, but maintain that core concept of how open source participation works within GitHub.
And one of the cool points that you talked about that ties into one of our previous points is, for Zenith specifically, what we're looking for as far as contributions are more ideas right now. So going through the process, raising an issue, putting the information, the blockers that are identified are not necessarily code or technical. They don't have to be. It's more from a conceptual perspective. So what that translates into, depends obviously on the situation, but that initial contribution, how to get involved, how to get started, all we need is your ideas, your thoughts, and how it ties into emerging technology and FINOS and overall. So that's something that's really cool that ties in, that anyone can get involved. If you have a good idea, that's where we start. So Keith, another aspect that you just talked about, the the diverse nature of the maintainer team for the Zenith SIG and specifically for the repo. It kind of dovetails very nicely with, what's the point of open source? What's the benefit of it? And based off our own experience with Zenith, but just in the ecosystem overall, I'd like to get your thoughts on why open source? Why do we do this to start with?
Well, for me, it comes down more into how it impacts the business model. So the way I see it is that the value of open source is about solving the common problems that everyone faces. So you look at the types of things where not there's like a standardized solution for it, like, for example, the transportation of ice cream, right? You put it in a refrigerated truck and then that helps you not have melted ice cream when you get it to the end point. And the refrigerated truck design, the core of it, that's something that's fairly open. Anyone can make a refrigeration unit, anyone can mount a refrigeration unit to a truck. There's different degrees of success you can have in efficiency, fuel efficiency, weight load, distance that can be traveled, all those different things, but they're just, the derivations of the core idea. The core idea, refrigerated truck, fairly common thing. If we take that ridiculous abstraction and we start to think about it in a technology standpoint, if you think about like fundamentals into the software development kit for how to interface with a quantum system, or the learning language model that's going to understand the idioms and grammar within the English language, just the fundamentals of language, not going into like a specialism like legal language or financial language or risk language, just the fundamentals of here's a sentence, this is a noun, this is a verb, this is an adjective, this is an adverb, all the different components, making sure you understand prefixes and suffixes, and then looking at some of the weird and wonky bits of language, like contractions and idioms and different phrases and sarcasm that can come about in language that us as humans, we understand and we take for granted that we understand, but a learning language model wouldn't. Having that fundamental understanding of language is something that's going to benefit everybody. So it makes a lot of sense to open source a really good fundamental language model. And when we talk about emerging technology, we talk about things that are coming out from labs. We talk about things that are coming out of white papers and research teams and spin-outs from universities where it's only been proven in a lab in some cases. And in other cases, it's fairly mature, but there's a little bit that's like not quite right for prime time. And these are things that if we talk about a large financial services organization that needs things to be enterprise ready, it needs to be so safe and so secure and ready to interface with governance as well as individual proprietary systems. These are really, really complicated. So you want the fundamentals of it to be a standard, so to speak. And it's what's led to things like React and JavaScript and PHP and HTML to proliferate because everyone can understand the fundamentals of them, but then they can do their little nuance stuff for the things that they want to do. So we know that, FINOS is part of the Linux Foundation. Linux has been a fundamental operating system, more so for things like servers, which everyone's using, and it's much easier when you've got a standard operating system to secure it, to harden it. The same will go for the types of technology that we're working on within the emerging technology space, where if we solve it as a collective, we pull all of our resources, we pull all of our expertise, we also pull, in some cases, our money together to solve the common problems that we're all going to have to do. So there's no duplication of effort when we go to think about how this is going to be adopted. And that becomes really key because we don't want to end up in a situation where you've got HD, DVD, and Blu-ray, right? And it becomes a bun fight to find out which standard is going to be best. If everyone's around the table and everyone helps to define the core standard that starts off with, we then have that to move forward with as a collective, and then start thinking about, right, if I take that and build on top of it, knowing that that's stable and everybody supports it, I can start to think about my differentiating factor. I can think about my specific use case and how that fits in with my client, my stack, my security, all these core things that you operating within an institution really need to consider. And so for us, giving a platform for the collective to come together to say, this is what we want to solve. These are some ideas about how we're going to solve. We can all come together and sort of make something and hack about with each other to try to solve. That isn't just limited to, which legal entity you're part of or which company that you're part of. It's a collective group. And then there's a fundamental output of that. Us as a company can bring in a trusted license in a trusted way, full transparency in how the stack was built. It was all there. And we can start to differentiate it, knowing that we have interoperability with other users of it, knowing that maybe there's a smaller agile company that's going to pick up that language, something really, really cool with that library. And then we can either go and work with them, knowing that we fundamentally trust the stack that they're building things on. That, I think, is going to be the real value of open source. And as we look towards the future of especially things like Web3 and so forth, we start to think about it being decentralized and being less behind closed doors, behind closed walls. We've started to see the migration to cloud. We've started to see that a lot of standards have had to change because of cloud migration. And so I think that that's naturally going to just expand out through the open source community where we're all going to need to have these fundamental things so we don't end up in a digital Tower of Babylon situation. And now all of a sudden everybody's speaking different languages to try and do the same thing. Open source is a really good way to try and prevent that, in my opinion.
Other than my Blu-ray collection feeling attacked, there's actually
Blu-ray
probably a
one,
good
Blu-ray one, HD DVD. That was the one that went the way of dinosaur. So your Blu-ray collection, that's evolution winning.
It's probably a good shout out. One of the things you were talking about, standard the standard way, the standard language. One of FINOS's project is FTC3. It's a good shout out for those who are interested in what does that mean from a language standardization perspective, driving technological interoperability. Take a look at FTC3, and I'm sure you'll probably put a nice little card up on post here to kind of bring it up to. But that falls in line exactly with what you were referring to. And while FTC3 is for one specific approach, that liberal approach is what we're looking for. Solving the common goal, common problem with emerging technology, and getting it to a point where we can reuse it and bring it across.
Okay, so that kind of outlines a lot of the topics that we want to cover today. We don't want to get too long-winded. But if someone does want to get long-winded into what we is on the fourth Thursday of the month, we run a special interest group within FINOS, which is the Zenith one. You can come along, and that is where we typically cover everything that's happening in the emerging technology space. It's a public session, so anyone and everyone is open to come along. You can find out more in the FINOS calendar, which I'll link down in the doobly-doo underneath. But just to sort of let's condense everything we've talked about over the last like 20 minutes or so, Patrick. Like, how would you sum up the whole world of getting involved and getting started in open source contribution?
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's this particular project, technology, anything that you're already interested in, take a look at it. Find the repo, find the documentation, start diving into it. And if you don't, if you don't have that kind of like, hey, I really want to poke into this, come take a look at the Zenith repo. We have issues up that you're referring to, Keith. We have discussions up, and honestly, as a good jumping off point, if you don't even want to get into like templates of issues or anything of that nature, take a look at the discussions. Discussions are quite literally just a chat discussion, as simple as that. Where hey, we're looking at I think the latest one we had was regarding the LLMs and just the AI overall. Take a look at it. It'll have some resources that kind of link off to the primers and whatnot. Great, you have some information you can just consume and learn. But then the discussions themselves are really as easy as a 1-2 liner of, hey, what about this particular thing, or hey, I agreed or disagreed with this particular aspect, let's dive more into it. And that will spin off a whole bunch of further contributions, some discussions on the SIG calls, to your point, Keith. And there you go. You kind of started going down the rabbit hole at that point, just based off a 1-2 liner comment. And frankly, that's the beauty of it, is you're going to start as simple as possible and it'll become whatever you want it to become. So we're more than welcome. We're more than, hopefully you see that through these calls and through these videos that we're friendly. We enjoy working with people. So please, if you were interested in getting involved, come join the party.
Yeah,
Keith, anything else you want to add?
yeah, definitely. Because like obviously, my part of the repo is the primers. That's the stuff I've been working. And I'm more than happy for anyone to come in and want to add or correct anything I've put on there. So if your preference is to maybe read through something that already exists and go, I think you've maybe not written that bit properly, or how could you possibly have missed this particular thing? Like forking that off and then rewriting part of it and then merging it back in. We would love to see that. Like all of the stuff that we publish on Zenith is open source by design. We are not precious about it. If you come back and say, maybe this should have been in there, maybe that should be different. Here's another use case. Can maybe add a little bit of color to it. Please. That would be amazing. We would love to see more people doing that. And don't think that the discussions that are on the GitHub as well are sacred. Like, please feel free to start your own. If there's things that, you've heard us talking, you've maybe been to one of the SIG meetings or you've read some of the blog posts that we're publishing, and you think, hey, why aren't you guys talking about this? Or why isn't this on the radar? Like, we would love to see that sort of stuff come up in the discussion. Because it's a community driven project, there's a special interest group, and the group part is really key. We would love to have more people in it. Just because us as the Zenith team, I guess it would be all we have is the responsibility of making sure that everything works and that there's content for the podcast, there's content for the primers, there's content for the SIG meetings. It just means that we're accountable and good responsibility, but we're also here to facilitate any other conversation that's going on. So I would hope that people would see the ridiculousness that is this video and the other videos that we've done, see our sense of humor, see the fact that we're approachable and just want to engage with us as well. So thanks for joining us. This has been a great little session that we recorded. If you would like to know more about the things that we do, you can go to zenith.finos.org. That will take you to the site we run, to all of the stuff that we're doing. If you'd like to get in contact with me, my details are down here. So you can see me at Tenatsin on GitHub or Keith Giordano on LinkedIn. All my details are there. Please feel free to get in touch. Patrick?
So similarly, my details are partially here. If you want to find me on GitHub, so my handle is Pedrenix. where I actually host a blog there as well, using GitHub Pages. So if you want to follow along the blog, you can go through the repo, or you can go straight to the link, which is blog.quantumlyconfused.com. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn as well. I'm pretty active there, and I share a lot of the blog material and other kind of fun tidbits. But yeah, this is the conversation. So let's get involved. Let's keep it going. Thanks a lot, everyone.
No, thanks. And we'll see you again for our next session, which we're hoping to do on decentralized ledger technology blockchain. So let's see how much we can piss off the crypto bros while trying desperately to win the top. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks a lot. Bye.